Good morning, and welcome back to the Atomic Ladies podcast, where we, Mackenzie, Alexandra, and I, Clara, tell you guys all about the atomic weapons.
Today's episode is called Atomic Psychology, and it's going to be focused on atomic weapons and their psychological impact on society in the years following World War II and into the Cold War.
But first, we need to do a quick recap of what led to the atomic bomb being created, and what led to its deployment. It all started with the discovery of nuclear fission by a few German scientists in 1938. Their names were Otto Hahn, Lise Meitner, and Fritz Strassmann.
A discovery of that magnitude would have caused quite a bit of fear in the government. With that much power, it wouldn't take much for the Germans to make it into a weapon.
Exactly. So the U.S. government put together the Manhattan Project, a group of scientists and military officials, one of the most well-known being Oppenheimer, even getting a movie based on his time working on the bomb, which was stationed in Los Alamos, New Mexico, not Manhattan.
I've heard that the movie's pretty accurate. So if you want to learn a bit more about Oppenheimer, try giving it a watch.
Back to the recap. It didn't take all that long until the first test of the atomic bomb took place, called the Trinity test, in August of 1945. Less than a month later, the bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima and the second on Nagasaki 3 days later.
Although there was some warning for the Japanese government in the form of a declaration, it was called the Potsdam Declaration. It was sent out in late July, requesting Japan's surrender at the threat of prompt and utter destruction.
But when Japan didn't surrender, the first bomb was dropped, and eventually the second, after which Japan did surrender. Although the goal of Japanese surrender was accomplished, the deployment of the atomic weapons threw the world into a time of mass fear, and the US and Soviet Union into the Cold War.
Which brings us to our next point of discussion, looking at how the creation of atomic weapons affected the collective psychology of national leaderships and populations living through the Cold War and beyond.
Many people, including Oppenheimer himself, worried about the psychological impacts the bombs would have on people.
The Cold War mainly dealt with America, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The two main leaders at the time were Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and I guess the third is Harry Truman.
Harry Truman was the U.S. president who decided to drop the bombs. He understood that the people who would die had families whose lives would turn terrible.
He also understood that it would cause other countries to create bombs that would put America at risk too, but he still decided to go with the bomb.
He also understood that he would have to take precautions for when/if other countries were ready to launch their own bomb. He knew that it would cause panic in America and cause people's mental health to fall.
Eisenhower gave a speech talking about how the Cold War affected people, and he says, "The means we shall employ to spread this truth are often called psychological. Don't be afraid of that term just because it's a $5 5-syllable word. Psychological warfare is the struggle for the minds and wills of men."
They were willing to go all out because they didn't want anything worse to happen to the United States.
People were so psychologically hurt by the Cold War that they started brainwashing them so that it affected them less.
Finally, this brings us to our last point of discussion, exploring how the global community should navigate the future of atomic technology, considering the historical impacts.
The future of atomic technology is not often discussed because past historical events left a psychological mark on people, as was previously talked about.
To help decrease the worries among the global community about the future of atomic technology, we can strengthen our international security. This way we can prevent unauthorized access to nuclear technology and strengthen our defense in case any nuclear terrorism occurs.
As we have known from the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, having more nuclear weapons is not necessarily a good thing, and we should do everything possible to decrease the amount of nuclear weapons that are produced, and to be prepared for anything.
For context, the Cuban Missile Crisis was when the U.S. and the Soviet Union fought over the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. This almost brought us to a nuclear war since U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev were involved in intense negotiations. However, the whole disaster was avoided diplomatically when Khrushchev agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba, and the U.S. agreed to remove the missiles from Turkey.
Going back to the discussion about the future of atomic technology, nuclear power in general contaminates the air. Because of that, it would be beneficial to capture the carbon emissions through electric generating plants to decrease the carbon.
The only negative aspect of this is if we were to attempt to purchase electric generating plants. It'd be very costly and difficult to purchase, although the effects could be worth it for the good of our environment.
To end this, we could collaborate with the global community to discuss how we can provide a sustainable future in regard to atomic technology. This way, we can provide the potential benefits and decrease the risks of atomic technology.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Atomic Ladies, and this concludes our first episode about atomic psychology.